Welcome, Scott. It's great to have you here. You want to sit there? Well, this is great. Yeah. So how many red shirts do you own?
A few.
Yes.
I think I have about 11.
Yes, that's very good.
Just cycle through them.
That's right. Well, it has been almost 10 years since Azure was introduced at the Professional Developers Conference in 2008. I was there. I got to see Ray Ozzie introduce that in Los Angeles. And even back then, well, I should say, people had trouble pronouncing the name. So some things never change, right? Yes, exactly. So you've made tons of progress. 90% of the Fortune 500 is using the Microsoft Cloud. Now, of course, that's a big number that includes Office and Dynamics and everything else. But Azure has also expanded well beyond Windows to work on an array of open source technologies and tools. And so give us a snapshot. Where is Azure today? And what's on your mind as you think about just like the next year, 2 years ahead? What's really top of mind for you in terms of the future of this business?
Yeah, well, I mean, it's been just amazing to look at really the last 10 years, or really the last even 3 or 4 years in terms of how cloud has moved from, something that was considered fairly niche and fairly, why would you do it for most people, to like it is now the center of what every organization out there is thinking about in terms of their future digital strategy. But from a capability perspective, we're now in 40 regions around the world, and so a region for us is typically a cluster of multiple data centers. And so, we're now pretty much on every continent in the world. We just opened, or just announced our new data centers, for example, in Africa. So we're the first cloud provider that's entering Africa. We're now sort of, obviously from a capability perspective, have gone beyond kind of just bare VMs to, really looking at how you use hardware, whether it's the latest P40 NVIDIA GPUs for deep neural networks, whether it's FPGA processors for custom hardware. We just 2 weeks ago at the Sapphire conference announced our 20 terabyte SAP instances, 20 terabytes of RAM SAP instances. So the diversity in terms of the hardware, the global reach, and then as you mentioned, we're just seeing tremendous adoption right now. Basically about 90% of the Fortune 500 are using Azure, and deploying mission-critical systems ranging from customer-facing solutions to now running their core financials on top of us. And it's an exciting time because it's just the diversity of the tech out there, whether it's containers, whether it's serverless, whether it's DevOps taken to the next level. It's exciting as an engineer to kind of be part of that and really see all these people that are actually taking advantage of it and really building phenomenal solutions.
So we're going to get into all of that during this session: AI, field programmable gate arrays, all the deep learning neural networks that you're talking about. One thing that I wanted to show you here. Sorry, let me get the slides going the right way. So this is Microsoft's commercial cloud revenue and gross margin. If you look at this over the last 3 years, and the FY17 is a projection, but this is almost $15 billion. And of course, this includes Dynamics and Office as well, not just Azure. This is getting up to 15% of Microsoft's overall revenue. What does this tell you about the status of the cloud broadly? And do you and Terry Myerson have bets on who's going to be bigger over the next 3 years? Where is this headed?
Well, it's you can tell it's headed in the right direction in terms of from a growth perspective. And the thing that's also interesting about cloud, this isn't just true for Microsoft, is this cloud is very much an annuity business, and so annuity businesses tend to grow slower but pay off longer in the long run than say a purely transactional business. And so we feel very good about this number in that it's growing very fast. But it's also one where, as companies really bet their business on it, it's one that as they see success, they invest more. And that's one of the nice things that we're really seeing in terms of the growth is it's both lots and lots of new customers, but it's also people that often 1 year will dip their toe into the water and say, okay, we want to try it, and then the next year they go massively big. And so I think we feel very good in terms of just seeing that customer success. And we've very much pivoted our go-to-market strategy really around customer consumption, adoption, and usage. And because we know that rather than simply try to get a big deal up front, it's really around get a small deal, get them successful, and then they'll move very fast and see success. And when they see success, we see success. So it's a very nice virtuous cycle in terms of getting the customer's interests and our interests aligned from a business perspective.
So on that point, if you look at the gross margin, it's actually rising. I thought that the whole idea behind the cloud was that you guys were just extremely price competitive going down. I mean, how should people in this room think about that? Does that mean that they have a lot of leverage in negotiating prices with you guys because they can point to your profit margins?
I wouldn't think that, but no. Well, I mean, I think the thing that's happening, I mean, certainly from I think this is an interesting world, especially in the infrastructure space. It's been such a it's sort of a deflationary market in the sense of prices go down, not up, which is, something that certainly benefits customers. And, frankly, it's benefited, the big cloud vendors like us and Amazon in that, as our economics get better, as we basically bring on more capacity, our unit costs go down, we pass it on to customers, and it makes us even more attractive as someone to build your platform on top of. And so, again, there's a nice virtuous cycle there that's very beneficial for us. A lot of this is, there's a very big commitment you need to make up front to get into the cloud space. You need to be spending, tens of billions of dollars to build out the footprint that you need to be competitive on the global scale at this point. And those 40 regions that I mentioned of data centers and servers and power consumption, is an enormous capital expenditure. What's nice is, and the downside when you open up a region where you have the capacity to put 500,000 servers is on day one, it's fairly empty. And then as it fills up, the per unit costs start to change. And so some of this is you're seeing in terms of just the scale at which we're operating, the unit costs are going down. You're seeing in some cases where we've over-invested early to basically build out the infrastructure in a particular location. Now that location is doing incredibly well, that brings up the gross margin as well. So, I think generally we feel pretty good from a business model perspective going forward. And I do think it's going to be a very competitive pricing space for the next several years. So, we're not assuming that prices don't keep going down. We're modeling prices will keep going down, and they certainly have over the last year. But as we continue to drive efficiencies, hopefully the gross margin continues to improve as well.
Yeah, just quickly on the customers, are you seeing primarily legacy Microsoft customers shift over to Azure, or are you picking up net new customers? How much of this growth in revenue is coming from old versus new?
Certainly for Azure, the fascinating thing is it's mostly been, historically certainly been almost entirely new workloads. We haven't seen sort of a huge lift and shift of existing things happen until recently. I think we're starting to, and I think probably if you were to ask Amazon as well, they'd say the similar thing, which is, until the last year or two, core IT hasn't really been lifting and shifting as many workloads into the cloud. It's often been either net new workloads that the company is doing, often outside of IT. So it might be a business that's driving something new. It's an example for us would be like BMW, where they wanted to do connected car and they wanted to be able to do kind of a car experience. What drove that wasn't the IT department. That was actually one of the business units inside BMW that built a great connected car solution and ran it on Azure. We've similarly done recent partnerships with Maersk, which is doing shipping and logistics. That isn't sort of about like running our file and print servers in the cloud. That really is around how can you use IoT and advanced analytics to really fundamentally reinvent the logistics and shipping model in a new way. And so those are kind of new workloads. And I'd say for Azure, probably 80 or 90% of our workloads have always been historically net new workloads. We're starting to see now more organizations looking to effectively not ever sign a new lease for a data center or not renew a lease they might have coming up in a couple of years. And so we are starting to see more of the lift and shift happening now than we did in the past. And what's exciting is that's another wave of adoption that can be there. But we still see even now the predominant deployment is net new workloads or workloads that are being massively rewritten for new scenarios, being the prime drivers of the Azure business.
Yeah, let's talk about that competitive environment. Here you have the overall market share. This is from the right side 2017 State of the Cloud report. Obviously as you've grown Azure, you've clearly become, by most metrics, number 2 behind Amazon Web Services. What's it going to take to be number 1?
Well, I think the thing that, that we're very focused on is really, how do you really take care of customers and be very customer centric? Because I think, one mistake you can make in all businesses is get too focused on your competitor as opposed to really focusing on your customer. And so, step one is really, what do we need to do to delight our customers, knowing that if we do that, then we'll be successful business-wise. And in particular for us, the things that we focused on with Azure has primarily been around organizations. So in particular, enterprises or mid-market or SMBs from a business perspective, and then also looking at the software vendors that sell to those companies. So, I mentioned some, BMW, Maersk, others that are more the enterprises, folks like Adobe that are selling marketing solutions, or DocuSign, which is doing sign and contract management, or Avid for media-based solutions, or NetApp, we just announced a partnership with yesterday in terms of storage and data management. And so, what do we do both, again, for the organizations, but then in particular, as more and more things move to SaaS and a SaaS-based model, how can we uniquely help those SaaS companies sell to those organizations as well and deliver the technical solution for them? And so, a big part of our focus is going to be around that aspect, which is great both from an Azure perspective, but also brings in the broader Microsoft cloud, both Office 365 and Dynamics, and gives us, I think, a very unique play that can differentiate in a very broad way. And I think if we build the right products, make our customers successful, we'll continue to grow, and I feel good about our trajectory.
At the same time, if you look at the history of Microsoft and Amazon in the Seattle region, it's interesting because the cloud is really the first place where you're going head to head. You've had these two tech giants here for a couple decades now, but largely existing in parallel. What have you learned from Amazon?
In terms of specifically for cloud, or?
Yeah, when you look at them as a competitor, and I realize that, of course, you're focused on customers, and that is what you have to say. But what do you look at? What do you see when you look at Amazon and Amazon Web Services? Are there things that you do that they do that you wish you did better? And how do you look at that competitive relationship between the two of you?
Well, it's interesting. I think the partly because we are basically in each other's backyards, there is actually quite a bit of cross-pollination between both organizations. Both people that work in Amazon, both the retail and the AWS side, that used to work at Microsoft, and there's people at Amazon that now work at Microsoft. So it's, I think one of the things that's been interesting is the cultures have probably gotten closer together over the last several years as a result of some of that cross-pollination. And so, certainly there's things that we've learned from Amazon, again, the retail side, as well as probably more even the retail side in terms of the customer focus and some of the data-driven approach. And I think there's things that they've learned from us as we've had people go over in terms of the enterprise market or the partner market as well. And I think one thing that's kind of exciting is seeing that cross-pollination happening in the Puget Sound area. It's great for the Puget Sound. And I think it's great for Seattle, and it's kind of cool to see Seattle becoming kind of the cloud capital, if you will.
It is true, but for Azure, you can't be happy when somebody leaves to go to AWS. I'm thinking like James Hamilton is a very prominent person at AWS who was at Azure previously. How competitive are you getting in terms of hiring between the two of you, and how much of a fight is that over personnel?
Well, I think right now cloud expertise is certainly at a premium, and so. I think we both recruit pretty heavily, and we both try to take care of our senior people pretty well. So there's not a huge amount of cross-pollination, but it's, we're both 100,000 person size companies, and so when you have that many people in, 4 miles apart from each other geographically, there's bound to be some degree of cross-pollination that actually occurs.
Yeah. How seriously do you take Google Cloud as a competitor?
Well, I think from what I say generally is I take everyone seriously, and I think the thing that you got to be careful in the tech space is never not to take anyone not seriously, because those are often the people that you regret not taking seriously earlier. And so Google certainly has a lot of smart engineers and good tech that they've used internally, and so I certainly don't at any stretch undersell their capability, and in particular, I think with some of the work they're doing around AI, that's a place where they've used that in their own search properties and ad-based businesses, and so have helped mature it probably more than some of the other services. I think the thing that I think that they would probably even admit that they're still working on is figuring out how to work with businesses and sell to businesses and partner with businesses, and that's an area where I don't see Google that often in most of the discussions that we have with customers.
Yeah.
Whereas it's pretty much Amazon and us are in every single engagement.
Yeah.
Competing.
So, and that is sort of my last business-related question. Then I want to dive into the technical stuff because I know that is more of your sweet spot as well. But when you go out for competitive bids against Amazon, against Google, why do you win and why do you lose when you do either of those things?
Versus Amazon?
Versus Amazon and Google when you're in competitive bidding situations for big enterprise contracts or for others.
Well, I think in the cloud space, there's a couple things you need to do. I mean, one is you need to win the hearts and minds of the people that you're. Fundamentally, it's a tech decision, it's a platform decision. And so, a lot of what we do and spend our time on is, really focused around what is that end-to-end experience that we can provide the developer or the IT pro that is looking at using cloud. And, I think one of the things that we've differentiated a little bit, and if you look at, say, my build keynote that I did a couple of weeks ago, is, how do we enable you to use cutting-edge tech? Whether it's Docker containers, whether it's FPGA, whether it's AI, cutting edge, deep neural network, GPU acceleration, but make it approachable so that more people can actually use it, and that there's a set of tools that kind of guide you to be successful. And I think that's one area where both in Seattle and probably in Silicon Valley, we sometimes have blind spots where we kind of say everyone's as smart as us, or everyone has a PhD somewhere on their staff that really understands how to train this model or really understands DevOps in a deep way. And when you go out to more parts of the world and talk with developers, they don't have that experience. And sometimes the assumptions that we make as platform companies, where you just take these 5 things, stitch them together, and write a little bit of this and a little bit of that, and you have a solution. That either doesn't fly, or can often, that assumption can mean that when the customer goes live, they have real problems because they haven't done something. And so we've really focused with Azure, and I think it's throwing up more and more now of really, whether it's our admin console, whether it's our CLI, whether it's our APIs, whether it's the built-in monitoring solutions we now have, and in particular, the platform as a service capabilities that we've historically had in Azure. How do we really guide people to be successful? Let them use the latest cutting edge tech, but really try to make sure that they can be successful and help them be successful as part of that. And that's really resonated with a lot of organizations in particular, and it's probably one of the big reasons why when we sell to enterprises or we sell to organizations that we win is people like using it. They like the tooling that we have. Certainly if they're using Visual Studio, we've got phenomenal tooling there, but we've got great tooling now for Cloud Foundry and for Docker and for Kubernetes and for many other non-Microsoft traditional ecosystem technologies. So that's one that you got to win. And then I think the other area that we do successfully on is around the global reach that we have and things like compliance and things like security. And those are things that we're willing to have invested in that really resonate as an enterprise is trying to make that final decision. If you don't win the tech, you don't get, your compliance doesn't matter as much. But if you win the tech and have a really good experience, and then people can look at it and say, oh, you've got more compliance certifications than anyone. Oh, your data residency guarantees are stricter and you're willing to put it in the contractually guarantees in ways that other vendors won't. And the security capabilities that you're providing go far beyond what some of the others are doing. That often tips us when it comes down to, say, an enterprise. And then for a SaaS vendor, take an Adobe or take DocuSign or take Avid and media or take Schlumberger and oil and gas and so forth. I think one of the other things that they like is both the set of technology that we have that enables them to very easily integrate into an enterprise. Things like our Power BI for data visualization, or Azure Active Directory for identity management, or the integration with Office 365 and our Office Data Graph for integrating. Those are technical features that they like. And then the other thing that we do have that's pretty compelling is something we call our co-sell motion. And basically with the co-sell, if you are a startup or an ISV that's built a solution on Azure, Every time you sell to one of our customers, we actually credit our sales rep with 10% of your annual contract value that you've sold. And that basically highly incents our Azure or Microsoft sales force, which is the largest in the world, to bring you into an account to help you from a selling perspective in that account, and really help work with IT to approve from a security and compliance perspective that particular SaaS solution. And we've seen tons of success now, including with startups that are 100% Java, 100% Linux, 100% non-traditional Microsoft technology, but the ability to basically run on Azure and then get that extra entree into the enterprise at a global scale. They're seeing phenomenal business results, and so that's also been a kind of non-technical aspect that's helped drive a lot of our adoption.
So that can be a double-edged sword for some partners in the industry, because Microsoft and the other big cloud vendors are moving up the stack and can sometimes replicate things that those ISVs or those partners are doing. How should people in the room be thinking about that? Where can they add value today in 2017 in an area where they're not going to be at risk of having Microsoft eat their lunch in a year?
Yeah. Well, I think the thing that, it's a constant battle. I think one of the things on the platform side, regardless of what platform you're building on, the platform will over time get richer. And so, the trick is really how do you constantly add more and more value and build up as part of it. And then, the other thing I would say is, how can you ideally find a platform vendor that's going to work with you on that? And I think one of the things that we've learned at Microsoft, we kind of built our whole Windows Server business historically really through partners. We didn't have a giant Windows Server sales force. It was really partners bringing us into accounts, building solutions on top of Windows Server that really drove that Windows Server and then SQL and overall business for us. And so, I'd say one of the things that we've done is really embrace the partner world in a very deep way, because that has been our single biggest source of growth that's historically. And for my business today, for the cloud enterprise world, you look at the cloud business, but it's roughly kind of 20-some billion dollars of total revenue. Half of that comes from partners. So it's not like I have an enterprise sales force that's all closing all these deals. It's often through partners and with partners that are involved. And so I think we bring a unique partner mindset as we think about cloud, and that means how do we provide deals and leads? How do we help on the co-sell motion? And then from a technical side, how do we work with you so that if we're going to come out with something, let's not surprise you, and let's actually make sure you know how you can add value on top of it or around it. And ideally, how do we make sure that we can grow our businesses together? Because the worst thing in the world is to squash a partner that's helping make you successful, or even the worst thing in the world is to come out with something that isn't as good as the partner's thing, but you've basically damaged their business, and now you have something built in that isn't as good as what they were providing. Your customers aren't going to be happy, they're not going to be happy, and you're in a bad state. And I do think there's other cloud vendors out there that are running into that right now, and I wouldn't claim we're perfect by any stretch, but that is something that we're consciously trying to do, is make sure that as we grow our business, we really focus on our partners and make sure that we can help them grow theirs as well. And wherever possible, even if we're going to end up overlapping in places, how do we do that in a disciplined way? I mentioned earlier the partner, some of the new SAP capabilities that we announced at our Sapphire conference. And Satya was at last year's Sapphire conference, which is the SAP conference, on stage and talking. As the guy who also owns Dynamics, which is an ERP package, and also owns SQL, which does overlap with SAP HANA, I could look at SAP both as a competitor and as a partner. And the nice thing is we're able to kind of manage that well and recognize in some cases we will compete, in a lot of cases we'll partner, and if we're both mature about it, that can be a great win-win for both of us. And I consider them one of my better partners, even though I do also compete with them.
Okay. Let's get into a couple of really nitty-gritty technical areas. Serverless, the idea that customers are paying by the clock cycle, that the activity is triggered by an event. This is Microsoft's serverless application platform. This seems very nascent, and obviously Amazon was first to market with their Lambda technology. How much of the future of the cloud will be serverless?
I think a lot will. I think with serverless, there's actually two elements of serverless, and when we talk about serverless on Azure, we're thinking very much in terms of, pure pay by invocation kind of pricing model and runtime model, meaning there's no like fixed set of VMs that are running. There are also some of the other cloud vendors are starting to use serverless sort of also as a synonym for platform as a service, meaning you don't have to patch the VM and it just takes care of it. And so, I think of that sort of more as our platform as a service model, which we've had really going back to the beginning of Azure 10 years ago. But for serverless, for us, specifically on the dynamic invocation and the ability to not have any fixed resources running except when you actually use it, there we have our Azure Functions model, which is similar to what Lambda does today, in that you can basically write code that executes in response to events. We're slightly different than AWS in the sense of I think our developer experience is a little bit better. In particular, we have local execution and local debugging. And so once you start building a large serverless app, being able to set a breakpoint, being able to actually get a very fast REPL kind of loop going on your local dev machine, we certainly find for a lot of customers that's a big deal that they really appreciate with what we have in Azure. And then once you deploy it, it's a pure pay by the clock cycle style invocation model. We're seeing lots of really interesting apps with that.
Like what?
There's a couple of different ones. I'm trying to think which ones I can talk about publicly. I'll talk about a few of them in the generic sense. Some manufacturers, as an example, are using it for a lot of their testing and for a lot of kind of event-driven processing of IoT and other infrastructure. And so we have one large manufacturer that's doing something like 1.8 billion function invocations a day.
And is this the one that's only paying you $4 a day for that?
Yeah, and it's one of these crazy things where like when you look at the bill, it's like $4 a day or something.
For billions of events. So that does not seem like a sustainable business model. Something's got to change.
They came to us and they're like, yeah, something's wrong with your billing because this can't be right. And we looked at it and said, there must be something wrong, this can't be right.
Yeah, do you want me to go back to that slide with the 14 billion?
Yeah, and then we added it up and we're like, it's right, actually.
No, seriously, are you going to have to change the pricing for serverless? I mean, that sounds out of whack.
No, what's great about it though is, take for example that particular customer, there was sort of this like, this can't be right because this was we thought this was, we budgeted like $5 million for this and you're telling us it's like, less than $100 a month. And so it was a pleasant surprise, once everyone made sure the numbers were right, because it was so extreme. And then, what they turned around and did and said, well, we're going to now suddenly do so much more.
Oh, gotcha.
Yeah. And so, I think for all these things, that, when you think about, whether it's gross margin or you think about revenue, you need to look at it less on a percentage basis and more on an absolute basis. And so, they basically came back and said, we thought cloud would save us money, but we had no idea it would save us this much money. And now we're going to do this, this, and this. And it's not lift and shift. In a lot of these cases, like this particular solution that they built, it was very much one of a net new workload. And then they realized, whoa, this can completely change how we're actually doing stuff. And so now they're going to come back and bring a whole bunch more net new workloads that they previously never thought were possible.
So does the serverless model represent the majority of the future of the cloud, or is this just going to be one component where people aren't spinning up full virtual machines, they're just doing events?
I think you'll see, saying the majority is always dangerous because there's always going to be something new that we don't know about in a year or two. I certainly think the model of a very consumption-driven pricing is something that certainly the infra and the data platform, I think, is the direction that everything's going. And so, I do think this has sort of taken consumption to the next logical extreme where there's literally no overhead in terms of an idle VM or an idle set of capacity that's going. And so I think definitely you'll see on the serverless side, I think that'll be one direction. I think containerization is also going to drive some new economics as well. If you think about on-premise applications or even cloud applications today, the average CPU utilization inside a VM is often, for most enterprises, 10% for amortized out over a week. And that's because they've got peaks and valleys, and sometimes they have auto scale that turns it on, but there's still enough areas where there's some underutilization. And whether you go with serverless or whether you containerize something and then pack more applications on top of those VMs, I think that'll be another trend that is going to drive up utilization quite a bit. and will fundamentally change the economics for customers because they can basically do a lot more with less.
Yeah. You mentioned, obviously, containers. We have Steve Singh, the new Docker CEO, capping the day today. When you look at Docker's position in the industry, obviously all the major cloud vendors are working with them. How do you see Docker's role and Docker evolving? And is it inevitable that they'll become part of AWS, Azure, or Google at some point?
Well, we have a great partnership with Docker, and so we've really done two things with Docker, or actually more than two things. We've integrated Docker deeply into Azure, and so we have our Azure Container Service, and we support not just Docker, but specifically Docker Swarm as one of the orchestration frameworks that we support. We also support Kubernetes, we support Mesospheres, DCOS. So we support a broad variety of different container orchestration frameworks. And then within our Visual Studio tooling, we now have very native support for Docker as well as you build applications for, say, .NET and for others. And we've updated even the new version of SQL 2017 that's coming out later this summer runs inside a container now, both a Linux and Windows-based container as part of it. And then also with Docker, we did a partnership where we've actually, with Windows Server 2016, we now ship some of the Docker Enterprise tools as part of Windows Server, or make it eligible so that any Windows Server user can download it and use it for free as part of their license. And so that's been a great way also that I think we've seen some good success with them as organizations are looking to adopt a container-based approach. And again, be able to, on both the tech side and then also on the partnership side, be able to kind of drive some good business together.
Yeah. In the time we have left here, I really want to touch on security. I know it's very top of mind for many people here. I heard Andy Jassy talk a few weeks ago, and his pitch to folks to join, to sign on with AWS was, hey, we're security experts. We know what's going on. To me, that's kind of just sort of raises the stakes for the attackers to go after and prove them wrong. What should people in this audience be thinking about when it comes to security? Is it enough to simply hand your workloads over to a cloud provider and assume that they know what they're doing?
I would say no. The thing in the sense of, certainly from a cloud provider perspective, we're investing very, very heavily in security, and as I know other cloud providers are as well. I think the thing I always think of in terms of security is maybe sort of twofold. One is you can never be paranoid enough. And so I'm always, when someone says to me, like, if I use you, can I guarantee never to be hacked? I always kind of say, if I say yes, I'm lying, because we all need to be paranoid. I need to be paranoid about what I'm delivering to you, and I'm absolutely as paranoid as possible in investing heavily in making sure that we're doing everything possible to protect the infrastructure. And then the other thing is you need to be responsible at the application layer to make sure you're also doing everything you possibly can to protect your application. And a lot of the hacks and the threats that come out there, aren't because someone's got into the infrastructure. They've started with a SQL injection attack through a web form, or they've got a password that they've reused in many places and that's leaked onto the internet, or they've got ports open that they shouldn't have. And so it's also really, really critical as a customer of a cloud provider to really invest at the application layer, making sure you've locked down your system as well. And that's one area that I think we're pretty differentiated right now versus, say, Amazon or Google, is with something that we deliver with Azure that we call our Azure Security Center, which is basically built into the admin console. It's also available through APIs. And we basically will scan your environment constantly and basically coach you with about 200 best practices, where instead of saying, go read this PDF, we'll tell you you've got a port open that you really shouldn't have, or we'll tell you you've got a VM that you've patched, but your script didn't reboot it, and so the patch isn't applied, or you don't have encryption at rest turned on here, and so forth. And being able to and we provide that for free to customers, and being able to I find, show that to an enterprise CIO or a CISO and sort of say, you need to do your part, but guess what? We've also given you a tool integrated inside Azure that will help you automatically scan across your teams, identify where potentially you're not doing your part, and you can run this thing constantly. You can automate it. You can integrate it into ArcSight or Splunk or any existing SIEM tool you have. And we're sort of not just sort of making sure our stuff is secure, but really giving you the tools that you can ensure your stuff's secure. I think that's the message I like to tell, and I think that's a little bit more robust and also just a little bit more transparent that it is really both. We need to do our work,
two-way street,
and you need to do some work too to make sure that collectively. And if we do that, then I think you can have a fantastically secure solution.
Last question. We're over time here. As this audience, technical and business leaders, thinks 2-3 years out, what's the most important thing they should be thinking about when it comes to the cloud? What should be top of mind in all of these areas?
Well, I think the thing that's just exciting with cloud is, what can you do with it that you couldn't do in the past as you're building new solutions. And so I think, the thing to think about as you look at the tech is both the tech, which is fun, and as an engineer, I love to geek out on, but also what does the tech enable in terms of new business models, in terms of new customer scenarios, in terms of just net new things that we can actually go ahead and do. And I think if you can get both those right, where you can both have great tech, but then you can use that tech to transform your business, whether you're a startup or whether you're an enterprise, and do something that the world hasn't seen before, or do something that competitively, disrupts someone else in another market. That's often, I think, where some of the best success stories of cloud are coming from, and the ones that I think you'll continue to see percolate over the next couple of years is when people get that marriage of both the tech and what you can do with it from a business opportunity perspective, and get them pretty aligned. And it's going to be exciting because it's, if you look where we are today versus 3 years ago, a lot of the scenarios we're talking about look like science fiction 3 years ago. And the one thing I know for sure is 3 years from now, a lot of the scenarios that people are doing are going to look like science fiction from where we are today. And that's what makes this industry so fun.
Great. Well, Scott Guthrie, thank you very much for joining us.
Thanks so much.
Yeah. Great. Thanks. Thank you.